Welcome everyone to this Reform Hackathon. We're really delighted to have you all with us today and to be welcoming people from such a huge range of organisations from all over around the world to this event. My name's Sebastian Rees and I'll be hosting this event, and I'm a researcher here at Reform. For those of you who don't know us, we're a think tank and we're focused on ways to improve public services for everyone. And in the last few years, we've been especially interested in how we can use technology and data to build a smarter government and more effective service delivery. The event that we're hosting today has been very kindly supported by Imperial College's The Forum, and we've also been supported by the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation and the Government Digital Service, who've played a really big role in helping us put this hackathon together. So thanks very much to both, to all three of those organisations for all the help they've given us. For those of you who've never attended a hackathon, I'll say a little bit about the format first, and then I'll say a few words about today's topic. So for the purpose of the hackathon, during the event, you'll all be divided into groups and given a set of problems to hack in a short time period. And the idea here is to generate as many tangible solutions to the problems as possible. And please note that these solutions don't by any means need to be perfect, and you can discuss what the challenges to their implementation might be. What we'll do with that information is after the hackathon, we'll compile the results into a publication, and that publication will be sent through to everyone and be made freely available on our website. So why did we choose to focus on algorithmic transparency in this hackathon? Well, in recent years, public sector organisations, both in the UK and abroad, as many of you will know, have increasingly used algorithms to help make decisions. So from things like moderating exam results to detecting financial fraud, hiring staff and helping allocate police resources, a growing number of applications for algorithm use has emerged in the public sector. However, even though advances in this space might bring large benefits, concerns do exist that the use of algorithms to inform high-impact decisions might lead to unfair or confusing outcomes. And a lot of people do stress that technological innovation has to be matched by a high level of public accountability and scrutiny over safe algorithm use. Transparency is often posited as a solution to many of those problems that I identified. As the argument goes, making inputs and outputs of our algorithms transparent, making them easy to access, might do things like help build public trust. It might bring scrutiny to decision-making processes, and it might allay fears about so-called government by algorithm. But greater algorithmic transparency poses some challenges of its own. So for instance, we might rightly ask, what does it mean to be transparent? To whom do governments and public services need to be accountable, and in what ways? Are there areas where full disclosure is not desirable or indeed not possible? And what should we do about those cases? And perhaps most importantly, how can we make sure that the growing number of frameworks, guidelines, and manuals written to encourage algorithmic transparency really translate into positive action at all levels of government? And it's these kind of questions that we're really keen to work through today. And it's our hope that with the huge mass of collected brainpower in this virtual room, we can have a strong solution-focused discussion to help push forward the goal of algorithmic transparency in the public sector. Before I explain how the event will run and go through some of the logistical details, and we split into our breakout rooms, we'll first hear from our two fantastic speakers, who I'm sure know a huge amount more about algorithm use in the public sector than I do. So our first speaker today is Tabitha Goldstaub, who is the chair of the UK government's AI Council. And our second speaker is Aldo Faisal, who is a professor in AI and Neuroscience at Imperial College London and a UKRI Turing AI Fellow. So firstly, Tabitha is going to share with us her thoughts on the work of the AI Council, the particular importance of algorithmic transparency, and what government agencies are doing in this area. And then Aldo will give a short response with his thoughts on the subject. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Tabitha.
Thank you, Seb. Thank you. I can see the brainpower you described, all gathered in this room. I love looking at all the names here. Whoa, like some serious experts. Hello, everybody. I'm Tabitha Goldstaub. I'm the co-founder of CogX, a big festival that we run. And as Seb said, I'm also the chair of the UK government's AI Council. And it's in that capacity that I have the pleasure of speaking to you all today. I promised Ellie that I'd start with a little about the AI Council and the government's AI strategy, as not everyone will be au fait with how things are structured in the UK. And also just even for us Brits, it's not easy to keep up. Then I'll move on to some thoughts around algorithmic transparency in the public sector and hopefully get your juices flowing for the policy hack. So firstly, the AI Council. Some of you were there in 2017 as part of the industrial strategy when the UK government commissioned an independent review into AI. Dame Wendy Hall and Jerome Pesenti's review led to the government's £1 billion AI sector deal, and it set up 3 bodies to deliver on these commitments. The Office for AI, led by Sana Karagani, the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which I know there are many of you here today, and we'll speak much more about them, and the AI Council, which I was asked to chair. The Council is an independent expert committee that provides advice to government and a high-level leadership in the AI ecosystem. This sort of new trio, along with GDS, who I can see here today as well, and teams in the individual departments, and I hope that you are all on this call too, public sector vendors, institute advisors like Reform, make up the broad community of public sector AI. In addition to this government public sector ecosystem, there are many other players from academia, like Imperial, industry. I haven't been able to see your business names here, but I'm sure you're also here, and people like Ada Lovelace. I can see Rima in the audience. And together, really, we make up that truly vibrant AI community. So thanks all for being here. The council itself is just made up of 22 of the UK's thinkers, and I've tried to make sure that they're across industry, academia and civil society and can represent that bigger community. We work to support the growth of AI in the UK. We're here to promote its adoption and use across society with an understanding that AI will increasingly become a valuable part of the economy. We believe in the estimates that show that AI could deliver a 10% increase to GDP by 2030, and we want to make sure that that benefits everybody. The Council is on a mission to make sure that the AI ecosystem is more than just the sum of its parts. And we're here to facilitate an open dialogue between stakeholders. And so events like today's are really important conduits for this. So thank you very much, because really I'm also here to listen and make sure that we have lots of lessons to draw from the expertise in the room. As part of that mission to foster more dialogue, in June 2020, as the world was slowly thinking beyond the pandemic, the Council agreed we needed to set out a collective vision for the government on how AI could be developed in the UK. And so began the process of writing an AI roadmap. I hope some of you have seen it. It sets out a series of signposts and strategic direction of travel for the government to consider. Our main recommendation was for the government to write a national AI strategy fit for the next 5 to 10 years. Just a month after publication, the Secretaries of State for DCMS and BEIS have agreed that the Office for AI will write this national AI strategy. And so we've kicked off the process by digging into the recommendations and convening workshops to gather more thoughts from the community. You can see on the Office for AI Council website on the gov.co.uk, there's a place to sign up if you'd like to be involved. In total, we made 16 recommendations for the government to explore. We recommended things like scaling public sector investment in fundamental AI research, of course, and committing to a 10-year program of high-level AI skills building. There's a section on adoption, which focuses on both increasing by capability across all sectors and company sizes, as well as supporting the UK's AI startup vendor community. We doubled down on where AI could be impacting the public sector. And as this is a key area for you today, I'll go into that one suggestion. We write that government should continue to build on initiatives that have worked, such as GovTech and the guidelines for AI procurement, which the Office for AI wrote, which allow public sector to effectively purchase emerging tech. We do this because the benefits directly to government, of course, as you all know, but we also decided to focus on this area because we believe that more AI adoption in the public sector will increase the market for data science and AI technologies across other sectors. We also make clear that that isn't just a simple, pull through. We explain that evidence shows that human rights of the very poorest and most vulnerable are especially at risk when public services are automated. And as such, we suggest the work is done carefully and with the independent ethics committees like the Centre for Data Ethics, but also groups like ADA, to consider the social economic impacts. And we will definitely come to that more. So moving on, we look at 3 other sectors. We point at how AI can support the NHS, meet net zero carbon emissions, and defence to keep the country safe and secure. There is an emphasis on data, of course, with a recommendation of consolidating and accelerating the infrastructure and governance needed to increase access to robust, diverse datasets. Since the roadmap, we have co-published a paper on data stewardship with Ada Lovelace that might actually be useful for you all to review. None of this is possible at all without the public being able to trust companies using AI. So there's a section where we describe how this is enabled through public scrutiny, which is why I agreed to come speak to you today, because I'm so excited that you've focused this event on algorithmic transparency. Because as you, the experts in the room, know, transparency is one of the most effective tools we have at our disposal. We write in the roadmap that transparency measures throughout the life cycle are vital to achieving a robust system of good governance, which will enable public confidence in AI that will be essential to the uptake and long-term public acceptance. We described the other two related tenets as the right to give meaningful public input, and thirdly, the ability for the government to enforce these sanctions. When we created the roadmap, we knew there would be a debate about lots of words in the roadmap, but especially what transparency means and what it should mean in the case of artificial intelligence, because it's one of those terms that can mean different things to different people. I'm sure that you will discuss and debate this in your groups, because for some it's about being able to see the code. For others, it's about being open about every single step in the process of the design and implementation. And for others, it's really a mix of both. It depends which persona you're actively trying to give transparency to, as different users have different requirements. The type of transparency and documentation that regulators might need to have access is completely different for what the information we might want to give to a lay audience. Algorithmic transparency, in particular, is a vital mechanism through which we can ensure that the law is being complied with. We need trustworthy companies. We need individuals not being discriminated against, and that the applications of AI seek to promote fairness and human flourishing. This isn't easy, and in recent years, we have unfortunately witnessed several cases around the world that have hit headlines where algorithms were developed in opaque ways and have led to harm that we don't know why, due to certain individuals being systematically discriminated against. Greater algorithmic transparency is often touted as the solution to many of these problems. However, it's not always the easiest thing to be transparent due to technical limitations, particularly with machine learning algorithms and even more tricky with deep learning. We see a lot of work going into this with Adrian Weller and his team at the Turing. To answer these questions, many questions, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation and the government's digital services have been doing some fantastic work looking at algorithmic transparency. And so that's why they're so great that they're here today. I'm sure you've all pored over the document that they wrote. And so I only want to remind you of one of the recommendations, which I think is probably the most interesting for your policy hack. Or not most interesting, that's very unfair. I personally am excited about for the hack. They suggest that government place, so the CDI suggests that government should place a mandatory transparency obligation on all public sector organizations using algorithms that have a significant influence affecting individuals. They suggest the government conduct a project to scope this obligation more precisely and a pilot, which is really, I'm hoping, why you're all doing this policy hack. And they go on to specify that the government should require the proactive publication of information of about 5 or 6 items. My favorite, as I hinted to, was the one where we talk about how the decision to use an algorithm was made. Because I think we've seen the UK recently use algorithms in scenarios where potentially they weren't the right tool at hand. So it's not just about the transparency, but actually about the tool, but actually the transparency about the decision to use the tool in the first place. They go on to add the need for publication of the types of algorithm itself, how it's used in the overall decision-making process, and the steps taken to ensure fair treatment of individuals. And I know that today's event will complement all of this work, as I've already seen how well the reform team and Imperial have been engaging with the Centre and GDS in the creation of this hackathon itself. I'm really excited to see the results of your hard work and what innovative solutions you'll all be coming up with. I myself will be poring over those afterwards. And so I just want to leave you with one last quote, my favorite from Roosevelt. He said, "Yours is not the task of making your way in the world, but the task of remaking the world which you find before you." And so I hope that you have a super day in that remaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, for those words. And now I'll turn over to Aldo Faisal for his response.
Thank you very much. And welcome everyone to Imperial College, even just if it's in an informal digital way, as we're meeting these days. Tabitha, it's very difficult to add something to what you said in response. So partially because I think you spoke many truths, and maybe I can provide a bit of an Imperial view on that, and then some personal thoughts arising from there. So in terms of what the future brings in terms of algorithmic transparency, I think what we're seeing is that we're embarking really on a global experiment in how AI is transforming our societies. And what we're seeing is that we're observing different cultural, political trends across the major trade blocs worldwide, be it the Chinese, the North American, or the European trade bloc, and the UK is somewhere in between, in terms of what we are expecting and requiring in terms of questions from data privacy to understand how an algorithm made a decision on us. And I think it's a very interesting question to ponder how these different effects that we're observing at a societal scale will shape the innovation of technologies and what actually, scientists like me may actually consider an exciting project or not so exciting project. And these have been very strongly shaped, for example, by policies coming out of the European Union and GDPR that we're all familiar with, because it sparked entire developments of field. It jump-started them, where maybe 10 years ago, people would have not so keenly focused on these questions. So from an academic perspective, therefore, the challenge that arises is really a challenge about what is AI actually about? And I think there are two components. And one component we're speaking a lot about, and that's data. And there's another component, and that is agency. And that's really what makes AI transformative with respectively all other technologies that we had since the invention of the wheel or the fire. The fact that machines learn to solve a problem instead of being crafted by someone, so that for humans it becomes difficult to work out why they found a certain solution. And that's actually the challenge of algorithmic explainability and ultimately also of algorithmic accountability. But the fact that systems have agency also means that they can gain a certain amount of autonomy. And so the question becomes now very important to understand. If I have a single decision how this will play out, I can maybe understand why was my credit request or my social welfare request denied or accepted is one question. But once systems become entirely complex to make entirely sequential decisions, many, many decisions at a scale, it may become unclear how the overall pattern arises. And the only way really engineers like me have a way of shaping these, aside from developing the mathematical theories and the technical parts, is by effectively setting what we call cost functions. So cost functions determine effectively what an AI tries to optimize. So when we're talking about AI in government and AI in the public sector, it's often a question about how can we optimize things aside from how can we understand things. That's again the difference between data science and what I call agency in AI. And these cost functions actually offer a tremendous political potential, because for the first time, we can effectively expose citizens, voters, to what type of values they would like to assign to the outcome of policies that then an AI can effectively translate. And there's a tremendous potential for democracy in there that I see. But basically to allow citizens to translate their values or how they would like to see the society they live in shaped requires then politicians and policymakers to help shape how we set these cost functions if we're going to apply AI in society. And that is an aspect of algorithmic explainability that goes beyond just knowing why was the decision being made, but also making and rendering explicit what was the optimization criterion that brought about this decision. And ultimately, of course, what was the data set that was brought about this decision? So when we're talking about algorithmic explainability, we need to talk about what was actually optimized to change this decision and what data was part of that. And maybe we need to talk about accessibility of this data so we can reproduce or validate these decisions. I've spoken now a lot about data. And so actually I wanted to take a bit of a light relief for a second, if you forgive me, and ask you to reach for your smartphones or tablets, because I want to do a very simple, very short survey on all of you by asking you to go to this website that I hope you can see in the foreground. It's called menti.com. It's what we're using in our classes at Imperial. And when you go to menti.com, you type in the code 87751912, and then you're offered a multiple choice selection. And as soon as you do that, we basically ask you, what is your background? So we can collect some data about us. Okay, numbers coming in very quickly. Great. So while the numbers are coming in, let me just tell you about how we're trying to address these challenges that AI raises in terms of skills and education. So for example, at Imperial, we've established actually the first MSc conversion course that takes students from Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic all the way to zoology and allows graduates from these degrees to be converted into an MSc in AI student. It's a one-year course and it has a tremendous uptake with fantastic students coming through. Many of them choosing to go in industry, but also many to go further into academia and doing PhDs, for example. And I think just the breadth of these students is a terrible enrichment, a terrific enrichment for our research. At Imperial, we have also a strong focus on PhD training. One of these centers, doctoral training centers that we have is in Safe and Trusted AI, which tackles some of these questions directly discussed today. But also we have a center in artificial intelligence for healthcare, which I'm happy to be leading. And here, of course, in the healthcare domain, a lot of these questions about algorithmic accountability come to the forefront, more in the domain of medical regulation in many ways than at a societal level. But the questions are very related in terms of how can we verify and make sure that decisions being made on our health are fair. So in these domains, we're now organizing ourselves a string of workshops in the healthcare domain and in other regulated sectors such as energy or automotive, where we're going to go further into the depth of what is behind the regulatory acceptability of these technologies. And I'm extending a warm welcome to attendees of this workshop to watch the space and look out for our future workshops in this domain. I think numbers have come through. They seem to stabilize, and I see a great take-up from the UK bodies and as well as academia and industry. And I'm also delighted that we have people who are non-UK based as part of this, as well as the NGOs. I think this gives you a bit of a flavor of what you can expect as part of the breakout groups and the workshops. And having participated in these reform hackathons already last year, I think they're terrible fun. It's a great way to network and exchange ideas. And I do believe that the ideas that are voiced, discussed, and raised here will find hearing, because this is a domain that is so quickly evolving that people will look out and listen for any useful advice. With that, have great fun, and I pass back to Sebastian.
Thanks so much, Aldo, for those words. I'm now going to turn off the recording, so people are now welcome to turn their cameras back on if they were worried at all about being seen in the video. So I'll turn that off now.